So this is an instructional video to show you how to make a pencil skirt. We've got here the paper pattern, and I'll talk you through that in just a moment, but you can see that there's 2 pattern pieces which will eventually make 3 panels which will become your skirt. So if you have a look at the first pattern piece, which is your front of the pencil skirt, you'll see that there's a mark here that says cut on fold. Now what this means is that when you cut this part out of your fabric, you fold your fabric over and you place this end here where it says cut on fold onto the fold of your fabric, and then you simply cut around the whole thing apart from upwards, okay? And what that will do, that will then fold out into one lovely front panel. You also have a dart up there as well, which is there for shaping, and I'll run through that shortly when we get round to doing the skirt, how to actually put a dart in. And then if we have a little look at the back, this will create 2 separate panel pieces. Again, we have a dart up the top, but here you can see where it says cut 2 of 1 on reverse. That basically means that you're using this pattern to cut 2 panel pieces. Okay, so the way you would do that is you would lay your fabric out, and you would place your pattern piece down onto your fabric, facing upwards, cut one out like that, and then cut a second panel out, reversed. So as you can see here, we've got our fabric and we've actually got that folded now, okay? Try to be economical when you're folding this over. You only actually need to fold it over enough to be able to fit this panel on, okay? You don't need to fold the whole piece of fabric. So just fold it enough to fit the panel on. What you're doing then is this bit where it says cut on fold, you are placing onto the fold, and what you need to do now is pin all around this and cut just around these parts. Okay, so you can see here that that is that front panel piece all cut out. So it was cut on the fold, and then it opens out into one lovely front panel piece. Now with the back panel pieces, as explained, the cut 2 of 1 on reverse means to cut 2 panel pieces with 1 on reverse. This works more for when you've got patterned fabric. I'm just using plain fabric, but when you've got patterned fabric, if you don't do this correctly, when you sew your back panels together, you will have one side of your skirt in a beautiful pattern and the other side will be the wrong side if you do not do this bit correctly. So please pay attention to this bit, okay? So we are placing it once, pinning and cutting round with the pattern information facing upwards. When we've cut that out, we then flip the pattern over so that the information will be facing downwards, and we cut one that way. So here are the 2 back panel pieces that we've just cut. So you can see from the shape there that we did indeed cut one forward facing and then reverse, and you can tell that because we've got the 2 straight lines of the back seam matching up to each other, and then the curves at the sides where the hips would be. Now I've got all 3 panel pieces cut out for our skirt. So we've got one nice big piece for the front panel, and then 2 smaller pieces that create up the 2 back panels, with the centre seam being there. Okay, so what we need to do now is actually put the darts in at this point before we sew it all together. So what you would need to do is actually measure the darts on your pattern piece. So if we grab our pattern piece again, so we would measure this dart from this point down to the bottom, and we would need to mark that onto our actual pattern pieces. Before we do that, we need to fold them in. So what you want to do is you need to fold it over, and you want the 2 bottom points of that triangle to meet. Okay, so you fold it in once that way, and then for the second dart here on the front panel, you would do the same again, but you are folding it inwards. So you're folding both panel pieces in together. You do exactly the same with your back panel, so make sure when you've laid them out on your table that you've got the centre seams facing each other. And again, you should know that by the fact that both of these edges that face each other are straight, and you can see the curved edges need to be at the side. So again, we are folding that over so that those points meet each other. We're folding that inwards, and then the exact same with this side, folding it inwards to meet each other. Okay, now once we've folded all the panels inwards, as we measured the pattern piece previously from the top part of the dart down to the bottom part of the dart, that actually measured 16 centimetres. So we need to measure that bit here as well to indicate where the bottom of our dart is going to be. Once you've done that, so you measure right from the top and measure 16 centimetres down and just pop a little mark on there to indicate where that is. Alternatively, you can just pop a pin in it if that's what you want to do. Now, what you can also do just to help you out a little bit, it's what I tend to do, just gives me a little bit of a guideline so I know where to sew from. So draw yourself a little line in your tailor's chalk from that point down to the bottom point, and it would be that line that you would sew on. So as you can see, it was measured down 16 centimetres to that point, and then I drew a line from those corners of the triangle where your dart is indicated down to the bottom. Pop some pins in. A little tip, if you pop the pins in this way horizontally, it means that you can actually zip straight over those on the sewing machine without having to then stop and take them out if they were put in the other way. So where we're going to sew now, with a nice straight stitch, free and free on the machines that we use here. It might be different at home, but stitch length on free, stitch dial on free. It may be different at home, however, but you just want a standard straight stitch. So we are just going to stitch down this line where we've indicated. Start at the top with a lock stitch in, so you're backwards, forwards, and when you come down to the end, go as close to the end as you can and pop your lock stitch in as well. So first of all, sew all of your darts into every single panel that you've got. Okay, so we've now actually stitched all of the darts into the fabric. So if you can see there, so stitched right down the line on all of these panels. Okay, so that's 3 panels in total for darts. Okay, now if you'd have done that correctly, hopefully you have, then these the stitching will be on the reverse side of your fabric. So when you open that out, you can see your dart there where it's taking shape, and this should be the front of your fabric. So if you've got lovely pattern fabric, this is where your pattern is, and all of your stitching is on the reverse side. So now all of the darts are in, it's a case of pinning and sewing your 2 back panels to the front panel. So how you want to do this is with your front panel, have that nice and laid out in front of you, pattern facing up. Then you would put your 2 back panels right sides together, which basically means pattern to pattern. Right sides together at the ends. Okay, so you'll have this lovely curve where the hips are popped together, pinned, and the other side the same, where the curves are, where the hips are, pinned together. And it's going to be this point where we sew down. Okay, just use the edge of your presser foot on your sewing machine. Keep that to the edge of your fabric, and that gives you the correct amount of seam. So what I've done, like I said, I've popped the edge of the presser foot on the edge of my fabric, and it's going to be that part where I sew all the way down, and that gives you the right amount of your seam. Okay, do make sure when you are starting at the top and when you finish at the bottom that you are popping your lock stitch in. So you can see now that we've just sewn the 2 back panels to the front panels by just stitching all the way down the sides on both sides, and that's attached the 2 back panels to the front panel. Our next point then is to keep in the seams on the outside, is to pin down and sew our back seam. So those 2 centre backs, so those lovely straight lines, pop them together, and then we will be sewing down here. Okay, make sure that you have popped them together right sides together, so pattern to pattern if you are using the lovely pattern fabric. Pop those together, but before we do that, before we actually sew it together, we need to make sure that we know where the zip's going to go and that we leave enough room for it. So using the zip, we need to place the top part of the zip up to the top part of the skirt, and then we need to make a mark just with you can just use a pin to give you a guide on this. You want the pin to go just above this metal piece here, not into the actual zip, but just into the fabric. Okay, so that's my marker of where I need to sew from. That's going to be the part that I leave open to insert my zip into. So I will be pinning and sewing from this point here down to the bottom. When you get yourself a zip, ideally get it in a colour that fits to the fabric that you've got. But I suggest to get yourself either a 6-inch or an 8-inch zip. This one's an 8-inch zip, just gives me that little bit of extra wriggle room. As you can see, we've now stitched all the way along that back seam, only going to the point where the zipper's going to come down to. We've left that whole section where the zipper will be inserted nice and free and not stitched. So now, once you've done your back seam, turn your fabric the right way round. So if you've got lovely pattern fabric, your pattern should now be facing you. Okay, now with that part where we left the gap for the zip insert, if you have a little look, where the seam was, it's actually created these lovely natural folds in there, and what we need to do is fold those back on both sides, and we are inserting the zip into there, and we are pinning down. Your aim is to pin down nice and flush to the zipper. You can see there, that's my zip all nice and pinned in. So I've popped the folds back that are naturally created from that seam. So the fabric's been folded back at both sides, and the zip has been nice and neatly pinned in. You want the fold of the fabric to be butted right up against the plastic of that zipper. Okay, now to sew this in, if you have a sewing machine at home, you will most likely have a zipper foot. If you don't, it's fine. You can still sew a zip in with your usual presser foot. But for any videos relating to sewing zips in, you can find these on YouTube. So if you're unsure how to sew a zip in, just have a little search on YouTube about how to sew one in. Okay, so what we need to do now is sew along. Our aim is to get our stitch as close to this folded edge as possible. So we'll be sewing down from here, going across and coming back up. Remember when you sew in to pop your secure reverse stitch at the top, and when you finish at the top there as well. So I'm actually using a standard presser foot to sew my zip in. That's just a personal choice of mine. I actually prefer using the standard presser foot than a zipper foot, because sometimes I find that the presser feet knocks it out a little bit too far, and the stitch sometimes is a little bit too far away from the fold where I want it to be. So it is personal choice that I use the standard presser foot. Everyone's different. It's entirely up to you which foot you want to use. And like I said, if you want to use your zipper foot, there are loads of YouTube tutorials out there, so just search. If you're using your standard presser foot though, your aim is to get this part of your presser foot sitting onto the plastic of your zip, okay? And all you do is stitch down with that part of your presser foot onto the plastic of your zip. That's our zipper now, so nice and neatly in. You can see stitch goes all the way around, and that opens up nice and neatly. Okay, so our next point is we need to hem the bottom of it, because we don't want this ugly raw edge here. What we want to do at this point is actually create a double hem. Okay, if you only created a single hem, then you're only folding it over once, which means you would still see, even though it is on the inside, but you would still see that raw edge there. So what we do is we fold it over once, we fold it over twice, and you are creating yourself a double hem. Okay, so try and keep it nice and measured all the way around. So folding over twice all the way around the bottom hem, pinning as you go. Okay, and then your aim is to sew that. So I've now double turned over all of my hem all of the way around by just folding over once and folding it over twice, just to create this lovely neat hem around there. It's all pinned. Again, if you pop your pins in this way, it means you can just run straight over them with your sewing machine. Try to keep your hem roughly about 2 centimeters in width, okay? Otherwise it becomes a little bit too big and bulky. So what we're going to be doing now is actually sewing around it. I'm going to sew mine from the inside because it helps to give me a little bit of a guide. So my aim is to kind of sew across all the way around here, but trying to get as close to this fold on my hem as possible. Always start on your back seam because that's where people don't notice quite so much. So don't forget to pop in your lock stitch when you start it off on your back seam all the way round, come back round and pop your lock stitch in again. So you can now see, if you look nice and closely, we've got that stitch all the way around. You've got a lovely neat hem on the bottom of your skirt. Now what we need to do is work on making this top part look a little bit nicer, the waistline. So it's now at this point where if you want to, you can cut these pieces off. I do suggest you cut them off. Some people do like to leave them on, but it's best to cut them off because they become a little bit bulky else if you start trying to tuck those in. So cut these little pieces off now, okay? Don't cut the inside off down there, just these pieces that stick out over the top. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to create some bias binding. Bias basically means the diagonal of your fabric, and that's where you get most stretch. So we cut bias binding on the bias so we've got that stretch and it can curve around things. So we're going to finish this off with a little bit of bias binding that we're going to cut ourselves from our fabric. So I've now marked out where I'm going to cut my bias binding. So with the remaining bit of my fabric, I've laid that out and I've actually drew a strip across the diagonal of the fabric, which, as I said, is the bias, the nice stretchy part of your fabric, okay? So this is actually just 2 inches wide. So all you need to do is create a strip 2 inches wide, and the length of it needs to be the same length as what would be on the inside of your skirt. So use a tape measure, measure around the waistline of your skirt, and you need to do this length according to that measurement. Add an extra 2 inches onto that measurement though, because we do need to fold a little bit of this back. So mark that out, 2 inches in width, and whatever measurement it is on your waistline, and then cut that out. So now to finish off your bias binding, we need to go on to using the iron, and we need to create some folds in there, which the fold line will be strengthened by ironing it in. So what you need to do is turn it in to the middle on one side and iron all the way down the length, and then fold the other side in to meet it all in the middle and iron all down there. So as you can see, we've ironed in those 2 folds and they meet in the middle, okay? So make sure that you run down the iron both sides to create that lovely crisp fold. So we're now going to insert the bias binding into the waist, and this actually creates a lovely nice waistband, okay? So to do this, first of all, fold over just a little bit of the edge, the end edge of your bias binding to give it nice and neat edge there. Open out one fold, okay? So we're working from the inside of the skirt by opening out one fold and placing that edge all the way along the top edge of your skirt. And what you need to do is get that pinned all the way around the inside of the skirt. When you come back to this side where the other side of the zip is, make sure you pop another little fold in there to keep it nice and neat, and then just trim off any excess. So when we sew this in, so we're sewing it from the inside, your aim is to actually stitch all the way around it on this fold line. So use that fold line as your guide. Remember to start at the top by your zipper with your lock stitch, bring it all the way around and finish with your lock stitch as well. So sew all the way around that bit of bias binding on the inside of your fabric, using that lovely fold line as a guide for where your stitching should be. Now I've sewn the bias binding into the waistline all the way around the inside of the skirt. What we need to do now is actually bring this part over to the front. So we flip it over. We're going to be working from the front of the fabric now. So the aim is to fold this whole thing down, keeping the fold in this one. You don't pull the fold out. So keep the fold in that one. Pull the whole thing down and over, and we're pinning this along the front, and we are then going to be top stitching it. So a top stitch is a really lovely, nice, visible stitch, so you need to make sure it's nice and neat, and your aim is to sew as close to this edge nice and neat as possible. So now you should have sewn your bias binding down to create this lovely top waistband on your skirt. You can see it's stitched nice and neatly around the top there, and once you've finished that, that's the completion of your pencil skirt. And there is your completed pencil skirt. There's loads of different things that you can do with it once you know how to create a basic pencil skirt. You can pretty much do anything. You can lengthen it to create a lovely long skirt. You can shorten it to create a mini skirt. You can add ruffles on the hems. You can add peplums onto the waist. You can add ruffles into the seams. It's entirely up to you what you want to do with it. You can also add various bodices to the top as well to create dresses. So once you've mastered the art of a basic pencil skirt, the world is your oyster.